Hello, sophomores. Stretch out your hands. We got a lot of vocab words. We're on chapter 12, which is covering Western Europe after the fall of Rome. All right, so let's go take a look at our first word, which is longships. And here we see some longships. Longships were used by the Vikings. And these are people who were from Denmark, Sweden, an area we call Scandinavia today. These ships were very good. They could sail on the ocean. However, they could also sail up rivers very quickly and were used for basically pillaging or attacking cities, which the Vikings often did, and also could be used for carrying trade goods from place to place, which the Vikings also did quite a bit of. So there's our word, longships. Next is called the three-field system. This is a change that Europeans made to their farming in the post-classical era, which helped them grow a lot more food. What they did was they rotated their fields. They'd have one field have wheat, one field have barley, and one field be fallow, or let the animals eat there and not grow anything on it. And then they would rotate these fields so the soil would not become exhausted or lose its nutrients. This way, the soil would actually produce more and it wouldn't go bad and could keep nutrients and keep on going, and allowed the Europeans to farm more effectively in the post-classical era. Horse collar kind of sounds like what it is. It is a collar you would put around a horse. And this was actually used in the post-classical era by Europeans to help them with farming. Having a horse collar and then an iron plow would allow them to dig deeper into the soil and get better yields and more productivity out of their farming. So help them get better farming by being able to plow deeper into the soil. And that is a horse collar. The stirrups. Stirrups, you can see right here, are used on horses, and they allow you to ride a horse, allow you to go much faster, and be used in battle. Stirrups were brought into Europe in the post-classical era from Asia. They weren't invented in Europe, just like the horse collar wasn't invented in Europe, or the iron plow wasn't invented in Europe. However, it comes into Europe at this time and helps them basically advance their technology and advance their fighting with military with horses. Black Death, also called bubonic plague. This was a disease that just ravaged Europe in the post-classical era. Not only Europe, but also many parts of Asia. And it was one of the biggest disease epidemics. It was spread as it came into Europe, especially through trade, actually, of trade goods. Many historians believe that it came through mice and fleas that came through. Others say it was actually more like a virus, like the cold or a flu, that came through. And of course, here is something from a student from last year, Jason, who took this class, and he thought you guys would enjoy looking at this right here. Got that plague walk going on. All right. I don't know what that means, but okay, maybe you do. All right, we'll move ahead. The Little Ice Age. This is a time period after we saw a medieval warm period where the temperatures went down. And historians don't really know why this happened, but what we see is the temperatures went down quite a bit, and what this actually caused was farming seasons were shorter in Europe and many other places in the world, and it caused for a lack of food at this time, which, Europe, which was kind of coming out of the medieval Dark Ages period, kind of held them back a little bit during this time. It became harder for the average peasants to eat and affected life in the 1600s, especially in Europe. Dialects. Dialect is basically like a form of a language. So dialect doesn't mean you speak like a different language, it means you speak a different form. However, in this time in Europe, we'll see as many people spoke Latin, and Latin will become new languages like Italian, Spanish, French will break off from Latin. So a dialect just means like a regional language that people use. Also, you can hear this with English, where there's different dialects in England. English is a little bit different there. And also, if you speak Spanish, there's different Spanish between Mexican Spanish, let's say, and Spain Spanish are not exactly the same thing. Okay, let's move on to our next word. A vernacular language is basically kind of like a language that common people use. It's often not formal, it's not written down, it's not taught, but it's how people actually speak. Now, I'm going to pause for those who are in Spanish class right now. Many of you, when you say, that's not a word, when Ms. Lopez tries to teach you a word, or Ms. Morano next year, well, it is. That's the formal Spanish. But many of you speak a vernacular form of Spanish, either from Ecuador, Mexico, or other regions of Central America, that have words that aren't formalized, like vernacular. English has this too. The word ain't for a long time was a vernacular word that people formally wouldn't use, but it's commonly used all the time. So vernacular just means a common language that regular people use. Avicenna was a very well-known doctor in the post-classical world, Muslim world, whose medical advances eventually spread into Europe. And Europe used many of his advances to advance their medicine and technology. That's Avicenna. Humanism is an idea developed in Europe in the post-classical era that basically that human beings should be the center of the moral outlook, and that human beings should, we should use science, we should learn more, we should try to become better in this life. Before humanism, Europeans were just mainly concerned about doing your job in this world and eventually trying to live for the afterworld. Humanism said, no, this life also is important, and we should try to be our best. We should try to reach our talents. We should try to use those talents that, in this time they would have said that God gave you, and do your best with them to serve other people around you. The Divine Comedy, written by Dante, basically this was a book, a Renaissance book during the Renaissance, which we'll get to in just a minute. Part of it, Inferno, talks about the different levels of hell that exist. And basically this was kind of a change in basically religious thinking at this time. More of a Renaissance, has a little bit more humanistic basis to it, the Divine Comedy that Dante wrote. And what's also really important about this is that he wrote in Italian, not Latin. And Italian was the vernacular language that the common people spoke. It wasn't like the high educated language that people spoke. So it was written more for the common, regular people to read. All right, let's move our Erasmus to the next word. This is Erasmus. That's a bad joke, but all right. So Erasmus, he was basically a humanist writer in the church at this time. He was in the church, and he wrote a book called The Praise of Folly, where it was in vernacular, and it was basically like taking more common people and making them more into the heroes, and basically kind of poking fun at the society that existed at this time in Europe. Copernicus was a man who really revolutionized science in Europe. At this time, most people thought that, or the church actually taught that the Earth was in the center and the sun went around it with all the other planets, which sounds silly, but if you look at the sun and see where it's going in the sky, it does look like it's kind of going around us. Anyway, he was the one who basically had the theory that the Earth was spinning around and was going around the sun. And the reason why it appeared like the sun was going around us is because we were spinning and going around the sun, not the sun going around us. He didn't have the tools to prove this theory. That would come with a later person named Galileo. But again, this was very much going against the church thought at this time that existed in Europe in the post-classical era. Scholasticism, which was started by St. Thomas Aquinas, was a belief that you could teach more academics and church teachings at the same time. And you could have your theology or your teaching about God and religion and Christianity, but you could also take some of the logic that was taken from the Greek works that existed and mix it together. Before scholasticism, the church was pretty much, you taught what was in the Bible, and if it was outside the Bible, it was wrong. This allowed other ideas to come into church teachings from Greece, and also from the Muslim world too, which was well advanced with science and philosophy at this time. The Great Schism of 1054. Now, we covered the Great Schism also with the Byzantine Empire, but here's basically what happens. We have mostly Eastern Europe, the Byzantine Empire, former Rome, and we have Western Europe. We have this Holy Roman Empire we'll talk about, which is different than the Roman Empire. Confusing, I know. But know this about the Great Schism. You had the Pope over here, with what we'd call the modern Roman Catholic Church. And over here you had the Eastern Orthodox Church with the Patriarch, who was underneath the Emperor, Patriarch. And the Emperor could tell the Patriarch what to do. The Great Schism was when Christianity splits, and you have the Eastern Orthodox Church over here and the Roman Catholic Church here. This is the first really big split in Christianity, and we'll see Eastern Orthodox in the Byzantine Empire. This basically still exists in Russia today. And we see the Roman Catholic Church, which we can see, obviously, we go to a Catholic school that you know about. But knowing the Great Schism, the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe split, the Pope's over here, the patriarch is over here, and that is the Great Schism of 1054. Religious orders are basically different little sections of the Catholic Church, or groups in the Catholic Church, that follow like a different kind of belief. For example, we're a Jesuit school. That's our religious order. We follow many of the Jesuit examples on here, characteristics, and we see some of the saints, how dress can work. There are some other, Benedictines are a religious order, Franciscans are a different kind of order, and these are the different kind of orders that are in the Catholic Church, being that it's such a large church that it kind of broke up with different orders that had different kind of jobs to do. And that started really in the post-classical era. Code of chivalry was a code that knights were supposed to follow in the post-classical era. Now, this basically meant they were supposed to defend the peasants, they were supposed to defend their lord who was above them. This was very much a feudalistic system where there was a king on top, then nobles, and then knights who were the army of the nobles. And this code of chivalry was a code they were supposed to follow, a code of honor. Many of them didn't follow it, actually. Many of them took advantage of the poor people and peasants and kind of bullied them around. So the code of chivalry existed. Some knights followed it more than others. When you hear the word Franks, often it will be thrown around with Europeans of the post-classical era. It's not exactly the same thing. Franks mostly were in people which would be located in present day, for the most part, France, also parts of Germany and Italy. And the Franks were basically a group of people who lived at this time. Many of them were involved in the Crusades, for example, but also when there wasn't a large empire, there was a small Frankish empire that existed in the post-classical era as well. But just think about like Europeans, especially of French and some German ancestry. If you want to know what a Frank looks like, I'm kind of look like a Frank. All right. The Holy Roman Empire was an empire that was created in the post-classical empire. It was that's not connected to the Roman Empire. It's not the Roman Empire at all. So, what you need to know about it, it was a strong post-classical empire that would grow in strength throughout the post-classical era and even into the next era, the modern era. It was definitely the center, a center of Christianity and a center of Catholicism, especially after the Great Schism of 1054. Norsemen, you want to be thinking about people from the north, especially Vikings, a common word that is also used with Vikings. The Vikings traveled a lot, did a lot of trade during this time period, conquered a lot of lands in Europe, held a lot of places like Britain and parts of France and other parts of Europe back from advancing, and also possibly traveled, most likely as far as Canada, after going to Greenland and Iceland. So they were travelers, they were conquerors, they pillaged and plundered or stole from a lot of people, and they were also heavily involved in trade in the post-classical era as well with their longship boats. Vinland is the part of Canada where most likely the Vikings were able to reach after traveling through Iceland and Greenland. So most of the evidence is the Vikings who are from here, Northern Europe or Scandinavia, went to Iceland, Greenland, and were able even to have a settlement here in Vinland where they were able to live for a short period of time. They abandoned this settlement. We don't know why. Could have been because of American Indian attacks. But they got to Iceland in 870, and they all reached all the way to Vinland in the post-classical era around that time. ምግrs were descendants of the Huns, who were people who came in, as we talked about, during the earlier era, era 2, 600 to 600, who took over Rome, empires in India, and also Han China as well, were a constant problem for them. The ምግrs were basically the descendants of the Huns who came in and were able to establish a settlement and live in Europe after having a big factor into, basically the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Those are ምግrs. The Normans were people from northern France, Normandy, who mainly we'll talk about in this era were able to come into England in what's called the Norman invasions and over time take over most of England. And many Normans and their ancestors are the modern people who live in England until this day. This Norman invasion happened in 1066 and really led to the development of modern England, which will be very important in future eras.